Okay, in this video what we're going to talk about is personas. So we, let me click. We've reached a point in the project where we've identified who users are by their role, and we've created this kind of journey map of the different stages that these user roles or stakeholders or actors have within that process. So what we need to do now is try and make that definition of the role a bit better and a bit more fleshed out so that it can help us in the design phase. So what do we know and what should we know about each of those users? So I've used the word users, but at the crux of it, users are people, right? So we need to find out what we know, what we don't know. We need to figure out how we can find out about these people, users, stakeholders, and how can we use that information to then bridge the gap, because we have a problem and we know that we have a solution, but we need to figure out how to get there. So that's where a persona comes in. A persona is a fictitious yet realistic and detailed description of the users of your product, system, or service. So fictitious means that it's made up. So we're not going to use the name or a photograph or any representation of a real person. But at the same time, it has to be realistic, right? Mickey Mouse didn't come along and want to use our system. And we need to have some detailed description. Because the devil's in the detail. The detail is what makes this whole thing believable. And if it's not realistic, then no one's going to pay any attention to it. So there's some recommended reading here if you're interested in the idea. So this is a book that was first published in 1998, and it introduces the use of personas as a practical tool within interaction design. And this quote from Alan Cooper, who wrote the book, says, "Personas, like all powerful tools, can be grasped in an instant, but can take months or years to master." And that's so important because a persona is an evolving thing. The skill of developing a persona is an evolving thing. It's a living document, right? So it will always be changing, and you've got to be aware of that and willing to change with it. So this book is available in the library. It's not a huge book, but if you're interested in exploring the concept of personas and how they came to be, have a read of that. So this is roughly what a persona is going to look like. We're going to have some representation of a person. We're going to have some name for them that we've come up with. We're going to have an indication of what their user type or role is. And in some cases, we might have a quote that really personifies what that participant said. So we might have lots of participants, lots of users. We have interviews with them to figure out what they need. What can we find out about them? How can we divide them into groups based on demographics? And sometimes there's a really interesting quote that you can just use there to kind of highlight the needs of that group. So things to note is that they're not real people, but they're not just made up either. So they do generally come from background research and interviews or focus groups with potential users or stakeholders. They're an aggregate of the common traits. So when it comes to something like the demographics, we might divide our personas to have representative personas for different demographics. And they kind of aggregate common groups of people. So for example, for students, we might have a persona that is kind of a standard home student. That's the most common type of student in the university, is a 19-year-old who lives within an hour of the university. But you may also have international students, you may have returning students, you might have students that have switched degrees, so there's a different focus there. All sorts of different, you can see that we can almost, not neatly, because it's never neat, but we can start to divide them up into different groups. We need research to identify who they are. And that's the crucial part that I want you to remember, is that we're not just going out blindly creating people, we're doing it based on some research. So why do we bother? So we create this living document that's then easy to update if needed. In reality, what we might have pre-COVID is we would have them maybe on the walls, so a persona would always be visible to the people in the design project. They're a simple summary of something that's much more complex. A user research report can be pages and pages and pages of demographic segmentation, thematic analysis of results, justification for why we think this particular user need is key. No one's reading that. Aside from the UX researcher, no one is interested in reading that. So if you can distill that into a representation, that allows you to focus then on a person rather than a report. So any discussion is based around what would that persona do. And it gives people this common vocabulary for describing the user. So we're really interested in the, Ian, the persona. We're really interested in Stephen, the persona. We're really interested in Amanda, because that is then a vocabulary that we know represents a particular group of people. And everyone in the team can get involved in creating those personas, not just the designers, not just the researchers, not just the developers. Everyone together can kind of steer and adjust, and particularly over time, if that document changes, everyone has an input in that change. So I want you to take a first stab at this. If you draw a user, so consider the Open Day project, draw a user and note their age, gender, and any previous experience they have with technology. So grab a post-it, grab a bit of paper, and draw that out just now. So press pause and then come back when that's done. So what we would see is that all of those post-its you've created, that representation of the user is different for everyone. Hopefully it's very varied. And that gives us a sense of the diversity of our population. A student population is very diverse, a staff population is very diverse. And that fact that they're different for everyone adds this really nice challenge. If everything is different, how do we segment them? Because if we don't segment them into having very specific needs and goals, what's going to happen is we get the elastic user, right? Because there is no clear definition of the user. Everybody is different. And so by using personas, we start to group them into a much more concrete concept. So here's some examples of different personas that I've just kind of found or created for various projects. So we might have something like, this is one that's got a really nice quote. So the layout on these are very different, and that's kind of a design thing for different people who are creating them. So Lisa, some information about her. She has favoured brands, which tells us something about her. We've very clearly highlighted there some pain points, and also how we can serve. So we being the design team or the company, what can we do to help Lisa to achieve what she wants to do? So what she wants to do is she wants to have quick access to options. She wants to know what's new. She wants to see familiar brand names, and she wants support when she has questions. Yeah. So all of those things together is what this company is trying to achieve in a design cycle. This one is a bit simpler. This is a persona that was just knocked up in PowerPoint, and it's for a small design project that was looking at how people with special needs visit the dentist. So we have obviously a stakeholder that's the dentist. So we've got very clear user goals, and we've devoted a bunch of space to technology use because we discovered that was something that really varied amongst their different stakeholders. And then there's a bit of a story about what Stephen does and how he lives, and that makes him more relatable, I guess. This is one that's arranged a bit more neatly for a nurse. Again, the quote is there to just kind of give you that sense that it is a person. Another one which is a bit more text-based. This one has got something like kind of desired outcomes, and that's something that you can then compare against other personas within the design project. And that user insights is the really important part. So what are the frustrations and how can we help overcome them? And this one's a bit bonkers. I don't even know where to start. There's a whole bunch of demographics kind of here on the right-hand side. There's a clear image. Who is Fran? I have to read to figure out that this one is Fran. I read this quote first and then I see I think. I'm like, what do you think? Oh yeah, you think the quote. In comparison, this information is quite small, and really this information is important, but there's just too much of it for a simple persona creation. So how do we create them? So we've established that we want to move from the user to a person that we can relate to and empathize with. But how do we actually create that persona itself? So generally it's a combination of online research. You might do some reading in forums, you might do some reading on kind of blogs, that sort of stuff. You might be some scientific literature that can play a part in identifying the problem or the challenges, give you some background information at least. You might do a site analysis, so if it's about working in a particular location, you might go there. So if it's a project, for example, the dentist project, I did a lot of work on site doing research at the dentist. Sometimes you don't need that, depending if it's an online. You don't have to go to a place, but maybe if it's about designing a website, you want to do a lot of analysis of what's currently there. You want to interview the users, whether that's a one-on-one or a focus group to get the views of the group together. But there's a big part of this that's also intuition, and that is developed over time, that your intuition becomes more accurate and more reliable. But it's unlikely, particularly within a design sprint process, that you're going to have resources to do all of those things well, right? I mean, we're not going out to do interviews for a start. We don't have any ethical clearance, and it's just not really something that's feasible right now. So how do we get around that? So there's a process or a principle called Lean UX. And Lean UX is an idea that you can do user experience with the least amount of documentation, the least amount of resources, etc. So this is really a good method for someone who might be the sole user experience practitioner within a company. So if you're the sole UX person within a software house, you can't rely on a lot of documentation. You don't need to share it with anyone. You just need to document your own thinking, so perhaps a Lean UX process is useful for that. Again, you can go to the library and read more about it, but all you need to know is that it's the principle of minimizing documentation. So within Lean UX, there's something called a proto-persona. And you notice that the interview section is now gone. Intuition has been promoted. That's higher up the list of things that we're going to rely on. And we have some site analysis. That's if you have any resources or any site to analyze. These are sometimes called assumption personas. So Lean UX relies in part on making assumptions. So the fewer resources you have, the more assumptions you need to make. And then you iterate on those assumptions to confirm them or deny them as you progress. So Lean UX needs that iterative process to be successful. If you try and do any kind of user experience process as a waterfall process, you're high risk, because people are variable. People understanding people is difficult, so are you going to get it right the first time? I'm going to say no. So Lean UX in particular, because you don't have that extensive user research phase, you need that iteration to allow you to confirm or deny those assumptions. Those known unknowns, those assumptions that you've made, need to be clearly articulated, and they need to be clearly recorded, because otherwise an assumption becomes a truth. You've always got to have that list of things you assumed and continually verify whether or not those are correct assumptions. Do they still hold true? So this is roughly what a Lean UX persona might look like, an assumption persona or a proto-persona. You take one page of A4, divide it in 4. So you have like the name, the role, maybe a quick sketch of the person, not a photograph of a real participant, but something that represents that demographic. Then some demographic information, some information on how that person behaves, what they believe, and then their needs and goals and how that relates to the project. So as an example, we've got Sophia Smith, gym owner, CrossFit athlete, and a sketch of Sophia. The demographics is that she's 28, She lives alone. She's got a lot of qualifications related to fitness. IT is quite literate. She uses all of these devices. Behaviours is long hours in the gym, lots of micro interactions on the phone, so that's important. There's lots of picking it up, checking notifications and putting it away. But, MOOCs aren't really for her. So this is a project about fitness education. She wants to engage with other people but needs clear instruction in order to progress and continue within that process. And her goal is to complete this nutritional study qualification. So the aim of the project is to develop a system that can support a person like Sophia to get to the end point. So this is the process to creating personas. And I would like you in your project team to do this. We'll spend a bit of time within the class going through this process and iterating on it. So online research is going to take 1 or 2 hours. So that's the stuff you need to do beforehand. Figuring out what are the demographics of students, what are the demographics of parents, what are the decision-making points. Of course, you've probably been through something similar, so you'll have a good start. Then spend 15 to 20 minutes creating as many personas as possible. Literally just brainstorming all the different types of personas, stakeholders, representations that you can come up with for your project. And then place them all on a wall or a whiteboard and discuss them in the team. So what I want you to really pay attention to there are areas where there are overlaps or differences. So if everyone creates a persona that's similar for a student, done. That's going to be the persona. If everyone creates a very different persona for parents, perhaps, then there needs to be more discussion around that in terms of what people's justifications are, what are the assumptions that they've made to create those personas, and does anyone have background research that can support or contradict those assumptions? So that's that iteration on the assumptions. You're not just iterating on your own knowledge, you're going to iterate on the knowledge of the rest of the team. Then you can create some spectrums that make sense based on the project and the personas. So you can kind of have a spectrum of technical experience. So who has the most technical experience in order to the least. And you can place your personas along these different spectrums. Following that, you can then distill your personas into maybe 2 or 3 different personas. This may mean that you don't represent all stakeholders, but you will have an interest in a particular stakeholder area already, so that's fine. I don't want you to go creating personas for every single possible stakeholder. We're trying to narrow down at this point rather than expand the scope. So the danger zones here is that we devolve into stereotypes and bias. So being aware of that is very important. What demographics do you actually have? What have you included? And can you justify why you've included this? And again, the same for information about the person. Sophia enjoys long walks on the beach. Why do I care about that in relation to the project that I'm doing? Make sure you can justify that. The use of a photo can confirm a bias. So being very aware that you have not been unconsciously biased at the beginning is important. So a group discussion around that is key, and being careful of names. Don't call someone Karen, Susan, Chad, whatever. Immediately you have this idea of who they are. So try and choose something that doesn't have this kind of cultural connotation. It's hard. But what you don't want to do is start confirming people's bias of behaviours, needs and goals of someone who is a Karen. So what I want you to do is focus on understanding the motives and the goals and let that lead you to the demographics rather than the other way around. The demographics are illustrative. They're not the key information in all of this. And so to illustrate why the demographics are so dangerous, here is a list of demographics, and I want you to think of, do you know anyone or can you think of anyone who might fit this demographic? So someone who's male, born in 1948, they're successful, whatever a definition of that is. They have had multiple marriages, they have a partner, they have children, they have a husband, they have a partner, 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 they have a part They earn £1 million or more. They've got multiple children. They love dogs and they take holidays in the Alps. So I have two people who fit that demographic. One of those is Prince Charles, and one of those is Ozzy Osbourne. And can you imagine a situation where Charles and Ozzy are both in the same demographic group for something? It's going to be very unique and very difficult to come up with. So those demographics, be wary that you don't lead someone down a path that identifies a group of people that doesn't then match with your needs and goals. Okay, so that is a summary of personas. There's some kind of tasks within this video that you can have a go on, but if you're at this point now, the best thing for you to do will be to go off and do some background research on who you think your different stakeholders are and the different needs and goals, desires, and how you can address them. That's going to be the most important thing for now.